So today's topic will be Machshava versus Maisa, thought versus action. Does God really care about our thoughts? Do our thoughts really matter? So we'll go through different examples in the Gemara. We'll bring some apparent contradictions, and then we'll try to reconcile. So there's a Gemara in Nazir, Tractate Nazir, Chav Gimel Amid Aleph 23a. The Gemara talks about taking a vow. One is permitted to take a vow, even though we don't usually recommend it today, swearing, but under the right scenarios, one can take a neder. So let's say someone took, and if you violate a neder, if you violate a vow, you violate a serious prohibition, you violate a biblical prohibition. So the case is as follows. Let's say someone's wife takes a vow, takes a neder saying she's not going to have any TCBY milkshakes, she's not going to have any brownies, she's not going to have any chocolate chip cookies, no more fries. Need I go on? I think you get the drift here.
I think she needs some weight.
So, of course, and the husband knows his wife very well, and unbeknown to her, he annulled the vow without telling her, and sure enough, she went ahead and ate the cookies, had the milkshake. So she violated the vow. As far as she was concerned, she was doing an act which she thought was in violation, but in reality, she didn't violate the vow because it was canceled. So the question is, she had a bad thought. In other words, she intended to do something wrong, but the end result was it ended up working out that she didn't do anything wrong. So the Gemara tells us, they quote the pasuk in Chumash, Hashem yitzlach la. She needs atonement. So we see from this Gemara, this Mishnah, that mere bad intentions alone seem to require atonement, because she didn't do any action which was wrong. When she ate the cookies and the milkshake, it was 100% permitted. She just didn't know that. And yet the Torah tells us she needs atonement, implying that bad thoughts by itself, even if they don't have an action with it, warrant atonement. That's what we see from the Gemara in Nazir. However, we know there's another famous Gemara in Kiddushin. I think it's Lamed Tes, Lamed Ches, 38, 39. The Gemara tells us one who has good intentions, let's say you intend to do something, and we'll get into more details later what we're talking about. If you have intentions to do a good deed, to do a mitzvah, and whatever happens, it doesn't work out, the Gemara tells us, Machshava Tova Mitztaref L'maisa. A good thought, God equates as a good action. He gives you credit, even though you didn't actually do it, but since you were planning on doing it and something happened that stopped you from doing it, you still get credit. You still get credit for good intentions. Yet the Gemara says, Machshava Ra, if you had bad intentions, Eino Mitztaref L'maisa. If you had bad intentions, we don't connect the bad intentions to the deed. In other words, if it's unfair, but it works in our favor. If you have a good thought of a good deed, you get rewarded. But if you merely have a bad thought without actually doing it, God doesn't count it as an action. That seems to go against what we started off saying. It seemed to appear that even the woman only had bad intentions, she didn't do anything wrong, yet she still needs atonement. And from this Gemara we see you don't need atonement. So how do we reconcile? And also as well, another example, at the end of Genesis, in the book, the last chapter, in the last portion, in the book of Genesis, Vayechi, Perek Nun, chapter 50, the Torah tells us when Joseph and the brothers were getting together, so the brothers were very worried that since Joseph was in control, he'd take it out on them. He wouldn't, he'd take advantage and punish them. So He said, don't worry. Atem chashavtem alay l'ra. You might have had bad intentions, but who cares about your intentions? Elokim chashva l'tova. God had his own plans, as we say in davening. Rabos machshavos b'leivish. Many are the thoughts of man, but atzat Hashem hisakam. It's what God decides that makes a difference. So Yosef's telling the brothers, don't worry about it. I know you had bad intentions. You wanted to kill me. You wanted to do this. But God had his own plan, sending me down to Egypt, so don't worry about it. In other words, you don't need atonement. Like the Or HaChaim HaKod is right. He compares it to a case where someone intends to give his friend a glass of poison in the drink. You know, like that's how they used to kill their enemies back in the day. You see it in the movies, on TV, when they're making a toast, they used to hit the glasses together. Why? Because it used to be, that's how you used to kill your enemy. You used to put poison in the drink and give it to him. So to ensure that it wasn't poison, you hit the cups together and each of the drinks go into the other person's cup. So if they see you're not drinking, then they know they're not going to drink either.
So that's where it comes from.
And that's why we say l'chaim. We drink l'chaim, we drink for life. Others drink l'mavis, to try to kill one another. That's the contrast. L'chaim v'lo l'mavis. That was one of my topics. We'll have to go into another time on the concept of doing that. So either way, the Or HaChaim writes that it's compared to someone who had intent to give someone poison, but the end result, he gave him a cup of wine, no poison, that you're not liable. So again, we have an apparent contradiction. On one hand, we see evil thoughts by itself require, bad thoughts by itself require atonement. The woman who had the cookies and the cheesecake, she needs atonement even though she didn't do anything wrong. Yet we see from the Or HaChaim HaKodesh here, from the Gemara in Kedushin, mere bad thoughts alone don't count as an action. So how do we reconcile? So A1, the first way to reconcile is simple. There is no contradiction. Bad thoughts by itself need atonement. If you have a bad thought, you're planning on doing a sin, that itself requires atonement. The Gemara says it's not mistara, it doesn't count as an action. You're right. It doesn't count as an action, but it's still bad. In other words, if you do an action, that's worse. There's like an in-between stage. Everyone's agreeing bad thoughts require atonement, but not the same atonement as if you did a bad action. A bad action requires a higher level of atonement. A bad thought is only a half of atonement, whatever we want to call it. That's the simple way of reconciling that approach. But A2 will take a different approach. The second answer will go into a different approach, and will perhaps,
Can you spell where you're getting this reference from? Something with a G?
You mean
Gemara?
the Gemara? Yeah, or just write the Talmud.
That's a Talmud?
Yeah, Talmud. Gemara is the Aramaic word.
Oh.
So Gemara, Talmud, the oral law, the Mishnah, yeah. But it's Tal. Gemara, there's no English spelling, but the way I would spell it is Gemera. You know, Gemara, it's a made-up spelling.
Oh.
That's the way I've seen it, but it's the same thing as the Talmud. So we'll have to go back. Again, a good Jewish answer, we have to ask another question. So we have to raise a couple of more questions, and we'll hopefully answer up our question. So the Torah tells us in Parshas Beshalach, that's what we have in the Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapter 13, it says, Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef. And Moshe took the bones of Joseph out of Mitzrayim. While all the Jews were busy taking the gold and silver, all the booty from the Egyptians, Moses was involved in mitzvahs. He went ahead collecting, he was getting ready to take the bones of Yosef out of Mitzrayim, out of the Nile River, and bring it to the land of Israel.
Moses?
They're in the Nile River.
Whose body?
Joseph. Joseph's bones were put in the Nile River, and you had to go fishing and get them out. That's what the tradition says. So
Who took them out?
Moses.
Took Joseph's bones?
Yeah, because Joseph told them to. Joseph made his family promise that when they leave Egypt, they take my bones with me.
Oh.
So he's fulfilling the mitzvah of the request. In fact, why didn't Yaakov was taken out of Egypt and buried in Israel. Why didn't Joseph ask to be buried right away? And the answer is because when Yaakov died, Joseph was still in control, so the Jews had some power. But when Joseph died, even at the end of Joseph, it was wielding its, it was starting to weaken. So he knew if Joseph said to his bones to be taken out, Paro wouldn't have been too happy. Like when Montefiore asked to be taken to Israel, so the country he was in was not too happy. They took it as like, what do you mean? There was in France, I forget the country. It was like, to make up, it was like a Frenchman. How dare you not want to be buried here? Whatever. I'm not sure if it was France or not. For some reason it's popping into my head, but it could be way off. Wherever he was from, that's who the person was upset. They didn't want him to leave. So similarly here, Joseph couldn't get his bones out of Egypt. He realized that, so he said, when the Jews finally leave Egypt, take my bones with me. So Moses took the bones of Moshe took the bones of Joseph out of Mitzrayim. That's what the verse says, explicit in Exodus chapter 12 or 13. However, if anyone learned the book of Joshua, that's the book right after the 5 books of Moses. We know we have the 5 books of Moses, and then we have the next book, the first book of the prophets is Joshua. I told you Jeannie was coming, no one believed me.
I came there, I was in the door, but then...
And I saw you walking outside. So, if you look in the book of Joshua, actually at the end of Joshua, Perech of Daled, chapter 24, and I'll read you, and the bones of Yosef, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, was buried. They buried Joseph's bones in Shechem. So we have an apparent contradiction. The book in the Exodus, Bishalach, chapter 13 says, Moses took the bones of Joseph out of Egypt. And here in Joshua it says, the Jewish people took the bones of Yosef out of Mitzrayim. So if you had kosher tube, or if you had YouTube, if you had a video, there would be no dispute. Everyone agrees to the physical facts. It was actually Moshe who took the bones of Moses out of Egypt. That's the fifth. Yet the pasuk in Joshua gives credit to the Jewish people for doing it, and not to Moses. That doesn't seem to be fair, what? Yes, an apparent contradiction.
No, it's not.
Apparent's the key word. Ira says it's not. It's a real one, you're saying.
It's not a contradiction at all.
I know what you were saying. Yeah, so what's the answer?
The answer is because when Moses did go out of his way to make sure that Joseph's bones were taken out of Egypt, but when they left Egypt, they left with Israel. It was part of it. He was Joseph. I mean, we talked about this over the weekend. The rabbi talked about it. That Joseph was the first thing to actually go out of Egypt. It was Moshe, then Joseph's body.
Right. Yes, right. So I just wanted to say, give a simple explanation. There's nothing wrong with that.
But wasn't it also that Moshe took the bones out and then someone else buried them?
Yeah, it is. But here the pasuk in Joshua says the Jewish people took them out. That's okay. If it would have said the bones of Joseph were buried by the Jewish people, then everything would be fine.
Technically, I mean, because Joseph's bones did go out of Egypt with all the other slaves.
I know, but it goes out of its way. Why would it mention which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt? But this could have said which the which the children of Israel brought, buried in, didn't have to. It seems the pasuk seems to go in making special mention. Ashahalu b'nei Israel. It seems to be more. Oh my God, you can't say what I was saying. Don't take it literally. This means Moshe took them out of the Nile, but then when Egypt's a big place. Maybe the Jewish people. One could say that. Right.
Well, and also I think it's because like Danny talked about this was that It wasn't just that Moshe took the bones of Yosef out. It was supposed to be the entire. All the slaves were supposed to recognize that that was important, because if it wasn't for Yosef, then none of it would have happened in the first place. So I think the pasuk in Yoshua is saying that is reiterating that point, that yes, Moshe brought the bones out, and yes, Israel buried him. The Jews buried him in the state of Israel. However, it's important for us to all remember why we brought Yosef's bones out. I mean, first of all, he made the promise, and secondly, because it's important to remember his story. Because if you don't have his story, then
history,
right?
His story.
You don't have anything else, right? I mean, because that's what it starts with Yaakov, and then it starts with the 12 brothers, and the whole package, and then, I mean, all the things that Yosef went through with the dreams and everything else, all led up to the Exodus.
I'm not saying it's where you can't say that, but Rashi quotes from Chazal. I give a different explanation. That Rashi quotes Chazal that from here we learn a very important principle. That they're assuming Moshe brought the bones out, the Jewish people brought them in, yet they still give credit to the Jewish people for bringing them out. So, because Chazal tell us what happens if one begins a mitzvah, and if A begins a mitzvah and B finishes the mitzvah, the Gemara tells us not only does B get credit for finishing the mitzvah, but he gets credit for everything, for the whole. Not that the first one doesn't get any credit, but the one who finishes the mitzvah gets credit for everything. Like, where do you think baseball got it from? We know there's the starting pitcher, there's the closer, so therefore, there's a certain amount of innings you have to pitch, but a lot of times the one who finishes, depending on the score, gets credit for the win, even though he's only pitched one inning or whatever it might be. So, yeah.
Is it in a sense just syntax? Because seriously, I mean, Moses was a Jew, so he represents the Jewish people. So if they were to say that it was Moses or the people, is it not one and the same?
That's true. So then, but I agree with you. That's what I would say. But then why not? Then it should be consistent. Then, so why did it say? I agree with you. But it's right. Whichever way you want to put it, just keep it the same way. I'm not arguing what you want to write, but don't. But it bothers me if you're going to put one pasuk motion, then you're changing it. You're teaching me something else. That could be one message, that Moshe represents the Jewish people. That's a valid explanation. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just telling you a different one. In addition to that, that's probably the simple explanation. And Chazal just tells us another one, that it's the one who completes a mitzvah gets credit for the whole mitzvah. And that's a general rule. So therefore, it's true Moshe began the mitzvah, but the Jewish people completed it, so they get credit not only for completing it, but for doing the whole thing. So that's what we see from that Gemara. However, there's a pasuk we say in davening every day that seems to contradict this principle. We say every day in davening, in the beginning of davening, right before Baruch Shamar, if you daven Ashkenaz, Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis with David. The pasuk in Tehillim attributes the building of the temple to David, to King David. I would have thought it should have said Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis with Shlomo, because last I checked, Shlomo did the actual building. David did as much as he could, very little, but he didn't do it. It was Shlomo did it. So I'm getting the opposite message here. It seems to be the one who begins the mitzvah seems to be the important one, because David's the one who started building the temple. He gets credit. So we have an apparent contradiction. When it comes to the bones of Yosef, we see the one who finishes the mitzvah gets credit.
So was it David who started it?
Yeah, David,
and
again,
was it Solomon who finished it?
Correct. Everyone agrees to the facts. Moshe began taking the bones out of Egypt. The Jewish people finished it. Everyone agrees David started it, and Solomon, Shlomo, his son, finished it. Those are facts of life. Yet, the problem I have is, when it comes to the mitzvah of burying the bones of Yosef, they give the credit to the Jewish people because finishing the mitzvah is the important thing. Yet when it comes to building the temple, it's the opposite. They give credit to David and not Shlomo. How do we reconcile this apparent contradiction. Who's the important one? The one who begins the game, the starter, or the closer? Is it more important to have a good starter or a good closer? I claim the Yankees never would have won all those World Series if they didn't have the best closer in the league. But what's the most important thing? Is it to have someone to start a mitzvah or to complete a mitzvah? Any suggestions?
Maybe it's one and the same,
What do you mean?
meaning that they're just as important equally.
So you want to say that the fact we have both, it shows that they're both important. Perhaps they both are important, right? But that's a
Are
possibility.
you asking which one's more?
No, I'm asking more. How do we reckon? I don't want to know which one's more important. I want to know how come when it came to the bones of Yosef, it says we have the facts of life. When it came to the bones of Yosef, the one who finished it's more important.
Mm-hmm.
And the one who, when it came to building of the temple, the one who started it. I want to know how come. Why do we change our mind? I want to know what the rule of thumb is. When is the starter more important, and when is the closer more important?
I think it depends on the message.
It definitely depends. I like that
It
answer.
depends on the message that the mitzvah or the person or Hashem is trying to convey in the message. So, like I said before, I think in the message with Yosef's bones, Israel got the benefit of burying him and finishing the mitzvah, so they would remember. It was a very important story. And likewise, David Hamelech was the one who started the Beit HaMikdash. And although Shlomo may have been the one who finished it, I think the message is that you have to remember who started it because of all the trials and tribulations that he went through to get to that stage. And, I mean, let's face it, Tehillim is all David, right? I mean, he's the first king, the important character, right?
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the message.
Right. Yeah, so we say along those lines, so it's obviously going to depend. What does it depend on? So I'll just give more categories, but along the lines that I was saying is there's a Gemara in Menachos 64, I believe. It talks about fishing, but not fishing on any day, fishing on Shabbos. So that's the problem. If you're for me, I probably wouldn't have a problem because I don't know how to fish. So I probably wouldn't violate a biblical prohibition. The problem is actually catching the fish, not the actual fish. There might be other things going on if you're fishing, but in terms of what I'm focusing on, one of the 39 prohibited activities on Shabbos is you're not allowed to trap. It's called Seder, trapping. So one example, if you catch fish on Shabbos, if you're successful at fishing on Shabbos, you violate a biblical prohibition of Seder, of Shabbos. Okay, that's a fact of life. Next, then, what happens if someone sees someone drowning in the water, river, lake, wherever you're fishing, and they throw in a big net to save the person's life, and when they're successful, they pull out the person, but they also pull out some fish with it. So did they violate the Aveira of fishing? So certainly not.
No.
They fulfilled the tremendous mitzvah of saving someone's life. Pikuach nefesh, docha Shabbos. Everyone agrees. Shabbos emergencies. In fact, there's no Aveira because you're allowed to, if you have to take someone to the hospital, you desecrate the Shabbos. You do whatever you have to do it. So that's, in fact, you have an obligation. You have to get whatever the quickest way of getting to the hospital or to the doctor, you do it. And in fact, it says one who asks the question, it's like you're shedding blood. The time you're wasting asking the question could be the difference between life and death. So that's the first halacha, the first law the rabbi should teach the community is any danger or most of the time it's doubtful danger because most times we're not doctors to know. But that person just got run over by a truck going 50 miles an hour. You think he's in danger or you think he can make it? It's not for us to start asking questions. You just call the hospital, call the ambulance, whatever has to be done. So that's clear. What's not clear to the Gemara is the following case. A person's fishing on Shabbos because they're fishing. And they're throwing in nets to catch fish. And lo and behold, what do you know? A child, a little toddler fell into the water. No one knew. The parents didn't even know about it. And he pulls out the net. and he saves a child's life. He catches fish also, but he saves the child's life. His intent was clearly on fishing, but coincidentally he also saved the life. Is he labeled a desecrator of Shabbos or not?
He is labeled.
Yeah.
Because he has bad intentions. So the question is, he had bad intentions but a good result. So that's what the Gemara wants to know. Do we go by his basar machshava or basar might? Do we go by? If we go by his actions, he did a tremendous mitzvah. If we go by his thoughts, he did a terrible avera. He desecrated Shabbos. So that's a discussion in the Gemara. So we assume the bottom line is it's a discussion, but probably he's okay because he got the mitzvah. But that's a discussion. We're not really going into that point now, but we'll get back. So what do we see? So comes along the Klei Chemda, one of the commentators on Chumash, and he says like this: this whole discussion in the Gemara on whether you go by one's thoughts or if you go by one's actions, that's only on a commandment between man and God. We know there are two basic categories of law, and that's what we have the 10 commandments, the 2 tablets. The first 5 are commandments between man and God, and the second 5 are commandments interpersonal man and man. Of course, so why is honoring one's parents doing on the first side? That's what the Talmud tells us, because we have 3 creators, as we spoke about many times: God, Mommy, and Daddy. And therefore it's the perfect transition, because parents are a unique mitzvah. You get a commandment of honoring your creators. Sometimes the kids doesn't seem to help the kids, but it's a unique mitzvah that you get a commandment of honoring your creator as well as honoring people. Kids are people too, parents are people. I try to tell kids parents are people also. So you get you fulfill both sides of the commandments here. So the Klei Chemda says, when do we discuss when action plays a role? That's only when we're talking about a mitzvah between man and God, like desecrating Shabbos. Then we can discuss what's the more important thing, the thought or the action. However, when it comes to commandments between man and God, man and man, everybody agrees. It's all about the result. I could think about going to the hospital and visiting X, but if I don't visit the person, I'm not really helping him out. Well, if I am, then maybe it is a mitzvah. Most times going to the hospital, if he doesn't want to see you, then maybe it's a mitzvah not to go. But usually, if I'm talking about just going and helping him out, they need help, whether it's comforting the mourner, etc. It's all about the result. I could think about taking someone to the airport, but if I don't do it, well, I'm not really helping the person. I could think about helping someone across the street or picking up something, etc., etc. But we live in the Olam HaMaisa. We live in the world of doing. If you don't judge motives. Unless maybe you only care about a person's motive if it's your kids, your spouse, or you're going to a psychiatrist. When the bully in the park, you could ask the bully, what's bothering you? I don't really care what's bothering him. I only care what he did to my kid. I only care about the result. Like, to give an illustration, let's say someone donated $1 billion machine, a life-saving machine. There's only one in the whole world. And that person makes a condition. The only way someone could use it is, number one, you have to have my name all over the machine. Secondly, they have to, before they use it, you got to tell them, and they have to repeat after me that I donated the machine. And for the next year or the rest of their life, every day they have to recognize the fact that I saved their lives. So you think the guy who's about to die cares that the guy's an egomaniac, or he couldn't care less. The guy's saving my life. I'll tell you, I could do anything he wants to do, I'll do for him. Just save my life. So when it comes to Ben Adam L'Chaver, it's all about result. So, and that's why we find, let's say for instance, if I have a $20 bill and I drop it without knowing, and a poor person picks it up, I get the mitzvah of tzedakah. Because even though I had no intent, I didn't even know I dropped it. That's why you find when the Gemara talks about mitzvah strichas kavana, mitzvahs requiring intent, the Gemara always talks about lulav, shofar, sukkah. It's all commandments between man and God. But it's not important, Ben Chavero. So in fact, it's the opposite. As the Rambam writes, we don't make any blessings when it comes to the commandment of any mitzvah ben adam chavero, any interpersonal commandment. We don't make a blessing on. Why not? We always make blessings, because the reason is because the blessing might interfere with the mitzvah. So for instance, let's say someone knocks on your door, they're afflicted with poverty, they want food. So you're a good person, you run into your kitchen, you take out, you have a nice meal already, you say 1 second. Baruch Atah Hashem, you have a lot of kavanah, long bracha, and the poor person faints before he gets the food. So obviously God doesn't want you making a bracha when the person needs food. God could wait, the poor person can't. So that's why the rabbis didn't want to set up a blessing on something which would interfere with the fulfillment of the mitzvah. It's all about helping the individual as quickly as possible. And therefore, and a person, let's say, spent 5 hours visiting a person in the hospital, he did some errands for him, and, oh yeah, I forgot to think, I was doing the mitzvah of Bikar Cholam. The bottom line, of course he gets the mitzvah. He actually helped the person needed him. So, of course, one should have the requisite kavanah, but when one does a mitzvah ben adam l'makom, then it's critical to have the kavanah. You're doing it because God commanded you. But if you're helping an individual, we're more concerned about you. You'll worry about your kavanah later. Just help the guy out, and then you can think about you can have all the right thoughts later. And so perhaps with this we can reconcile the question I asked. We said we have an apparent contradiction. It said the Torah tells us Moshe took the bones of Joseph out of Mitzrayim, yet the pasuk in Joshua says the Jewish people took the bones of Joseph out of Mitzrayim. And the Gemara tells us a principle. It's true Moshe did take the bones out of Mitzrayim. The Jewish people finished the job. And we see the one who finishes the job gets credit for everything. Yeah, we said Mizmor Shiach Chanukah Tabayis David. When it came to the temple, David started building it. His son Solomon Shlomo finished it. And yet we see the one who started it gets credit. So how do we reconcile? So perhaps we could suggest as follows. It depends what category of commandment we're talking about. When it comes to the bones of Yosef, the mitzvah of kfura, the mitzvah of burial, that's the quintessential, the prototype mitzvah ben adam l'chaveiro. It's the ultimate. It's called the chesed shel emes. It's the ultimate act of loving kindness, because when we do someone a favor today, tomorrow, not that we're necessarily thinking it when we're doing it, but in the back of our minds we think that person owes me one. In other words, like, that's where the concept comes in. You do someone a big favor, they say thank you, and you say don't mention it. In other words, don't think we're even. I just spent 6 hours helping you. Don't tell me. Don't mean it. That's what they mean subconscious. If you didn't know, I'm just filling you in. But the point being is that when it comes to Be'elam Chavero, when it comes ultimate burial, it's all about no one's waiting to get paid back on burial. Let me tell you, we can wait on that one. We can wait on the Taras. Don't worry. I'm happy to do it for you, but God, take your time. I'm willing to get paid back, in 120 years or whenever it is. So when it comes to burial, it's the ultimate mitzvah ben adam l'chaveiro, and ben adam l'chaveiro is all about result. So you think Joseph would have been happy? You took me out of the Nile River to throw me out in the desert somewhere? Don't do me any favors. It's all about the result when it comes to interpersonal. So it's the people who finished, the one who finished the job by burial. Since Ben Adam HaChavero is result-oriented, it's the one who finishes gets the credit. And that's why we attributed the Jewish people get the credit, not only for burying Yosef, but for taking his bones out of Egypt. However, when it comes to the quintessential Ben Adam L'Makom, commandments between man and God, prayer, tefillah, karbanos, sacrifices, the temple, that's the ultimate in terms of machshava, because God knows our, we don't know our own motives, but God knows them, and therefore God knows. David's whole life's dream was to build the temple, and it was no fault of his own. He didn't. By case of Moses, he did sin; it was his own fault. But by David, he did everything possible to build a temple. In fact, not for him, it wouldn't have happened now. It would have happened, but maybe hundreds of years later. It was only because David brought it. Without David, the temple would not have been built at that time period. And therefore, when it comes to Ben Adam L'Makom, it's all about the machshava. It's all about the thought process. And therefore, the one who begins the mitzvah, David got credit for finishing the mitzvah. So therefore, because when it comes to commandments between man and God, it's all about what you're thinking. And that's why God gives you credit for a good thought, even if you don't finish it, because He knows if you were sincere or not. And with this, we can understand something else as well, that we put on every morning, at least men do, most mornings, tefillin, phylacteries. We put on tefillin shel yad, tefillin shel rosh. If the way it's done is first the arm tefillin go on, then the head tefillin, then we take the head tefillin off, and then we take the arm tefillin off. If you notice, we're never only left with the head tefillin on. If we only have one on, it's always going to be the hand tefillin. What's the message there? So the two pairs of tefillin represent the two categories of commandment. Arm represents action, doing, results. That's Ben Adam, that's interpersonal. The head is the thought process. That's machshava, that's commandments each man and God. To be an observant Jew, you have to be meticulous in the observance of both sides of the tablets. Commandments between man and God, as well as commandments between man and man, interpersonal. However, when you're going to start, again, when you want to take on extra, that's just the minimum amount. If you want to take on extra stringencies, you have to first be grounded in commandments between man and man. And then because we see, you never left with we don't want to be someone who just keeps Shabbos and kosher and doesn't steals in business, mistreats everyone. We don't go for that behavior. You never just wearing the tefillin shel rosh. You have to first ground yourself on how to become a mensch, how to become a good person. Of course, you have to keep both sides, but I'm talking about the extra things that we're not commanded, but God wants us to do. First, we take on the extra stringencies, not working on our evil gossip or treating people properly, how we act with people. And then once we take on those things, then we take on more things as well in commandments between man and God. And that's, of course, God cares about both our actions and our thoughts. However, when it comes to commandments between man and God, our thoughts play a much major role because God knows what we're thinking. When it comes to interpersonal, of course, you should always have good thoughts and you should want to help someone, but the focus when you're doing commandments between man and man is, since no one knows what you're thinking anyway, the trick is to do the result is actually comfort the mourner, visit the sick. As the Sefer Achinach tells us, in Judaism we believe we don't care what your mood is, we don't care what you're feeling. I don't feel like doing it. I don't really care what you're thinking. I said maybe your parents, your spouse, or your psychiatrist does. The Torah is concerned with your action. As the Sefer Achinach tells us, actions lead. It's not that mood will... Well, if I get into the right mood, then I'll do. If you wait for the right mood, it's never going to happen. Actions create the mood. The more you do good deeds, the more it's going to have an impact on you. And that's what Judaism believes. That's why we have so many mitzvahs, so many commandments. We're involved in mitzvahs all the time is because action creates the mood, and the more actions we do, the better the person we become. And that's why God, of course, cares about the thoughts. Certainly God does. People care less because they only care how you treat them, not what you're thinking. Of course, one should work on themselves, and we should reach to love where our thoughts equal our actions. Of course, if we're doing good thoughts, that is. That our good thoughts should lead up to our great actions. And that's why when it comes to the bones of Yosef, it was interpersonal, it's burial, it's all about the results. That's what we care about. Therefore, the Jewish people got the credit. When it comes to the temple, sacrifices, prayer, it's all about commandments between man and God. That's when the thought process becomes more critical.